Move. Whoops, thanks. John Carew, seconded by Roxanne Darling. All in favor of adopting the agenda, please raise your hand. The agenda is adopted. Okay, next item on our agenda, pardon me, I just need to get my screens organized here, folks, is item number 1 is the business arising from an amendment to the Finance Administration Advisory Committee minutes dated February the 8th. You receive that in your package. The motion that I have that arrives from that is resolved that the Board of Directors, A, approve maintenance of current 2020-21 per diem and honorarium rates for 2022. B, approve an increase in the corporate mileage rate for staff to 57 cents per kilometer effective January the 1st, 2022. C, direct that mileage rates set out in the provincial travel, meal and hospitality expenses directive be used for board member mileage effective January 1st, 2022. And D, direct staff to conduct a review of per diems and honoraria and to table results for consideration before municipalities commence recruitment of board members for the 2022-2026 term of council. Could I have someone move that so we can put it on the floor for discussion, please? Moved by Phil Sweetnam, seconded by Paul Kehoe. Sally, did you have anything you wanted to mention about this?
Just that there had been a misunderstanding amongst some of the members of the committee, and therefore when they were reviewing the minutes, the matter was revisited and it was agreed that they needed to clarify this motion. And because the motion does change in substance, that it needed to come back to the board for consideration.
Does anyone have any questions or comments about that? No, everyone's clear. All in favor of the motion, please raise your hands. Any opposed? None. The motion is carried. On to adoption of the minutes from our last board meeting. Resolved that the minutes of the Mississippi Valley Board of Directors meeting held on March the 16th, 2022 will be received and approved as printed. Could I have a mover, please? Moved by Faye Campbell, seconded by Paul Kehoe. Any comments on those minutes? Seeing that, Phil, did you have a comment on the minutes?
Well, it isn't, I'm in support of the minutes. I just noticed there was something in there asking about an agricultural representative, and I had some information on that. Do I give that after as a business arising, or how do you handle that sort of thing correctly?
It's just a point of information.
Yeah.
Later on. Okay, well, let's get the, we're not amending the minutes, so let's just get the minutes approved. And then if you want to raise a point of information later in the meeting, that would be great.
Thank you.
Okay, all in favor of adopting the minutes from our previous board meeting? Minutes are adopted. The next item, we have item 3 is the receipt of draft minutes. No, we're not approving the minutes because they haven't been approved by the respective committees yet, but these are presented for information purposes only. So I don't think I need a formal motion to receive them, but they are part of the agenda package because you'll want to reference those for decisions and items that are coming up further in the agenda. So with that, I'm going to move on to item number 4. Which is the watershed conditions report, and turn things over to Jen North, please.
Page 26.
I can see a report, but I can't hear you, Jen.
Okay.
Now I can.
Can you hear me? Okay.
Yes, I can.
Oh. Some reason. My slideshow does not want to work.
We can still see it.
Okay, Perfect. I'll just go through it then. All right, just a quick update on current conditions for everyone. Over the past few weeks, we have seen 2 below average peaks within the Mississippi watershed. As you can see in the graph, I've also plotted 2019, which was a flood year, as well as 2001, which is the blue line, which was a below average spring. So you can see we're pretty close to normal flows for this time of year, due to the second peak, which basically extended our freshet into April. So it benefited us a lot. Flows are now dropping within the main system, as well as major tributaries. We saw a very uneventful spring. We do still have a water safety statement in effect. As the flows are still quite high, and we do have some rain in the forecast. But we do not expect any significant flooding to occur, and expect levels to continue to recede over the next few weeks. We are currently replacing logs in the upper part of the watershed. Pretty much all the snow is gone. Most of the upper lakes are at or near their summer target levels. We may have some issues with filling Shabamika Lake this year, as we had a delay in the replacement of those logs due to construction issues. So we'll be solely depending on rainfall to fill the rest of that lake up, which can be hit or miss depending on how much rain we get in the next 2 months. So we still have lots of time, but there is a small chance that this lake will have lower than normal spring levels or summer levels, sorry. So from now until May, we will try and maintain stable levels and flows over the next 2 months to meet the requirements of fisheries, wildlife, and ensuring that summer levels are met at the long weekend in May. So that's our target. This is typically a very unstable time of year as far as weather patterns are concerned. There's always a concern of levels potentially getting too high because of the system is now full. We don't have a lot of storage. And if things get too high, we're going to have to release water from the upper lake. But as you can see in the graph, levels on Crotch Lake are sitting just above normal. This is because of the early freshet. So technically we are within normal range. It's just a few weeks ahead of where we historically would have seen the peak. So we still have just slightly less than half a meter of storage remaining in Crotch Lake, which will be used to store any runoff from rain events over the next month. As for the Ottawa River, we should see a normal to mild spring there as well. Forecasters are predicting a similar spring as to what we had in 2020. So around normal. The long range forecast is predicting a slightly warmer, slightly wetter May, which will hopefully help us keep lots of water in the system going into the summer months, which will help with any kind of low water issues if we have a drier summer. And we'll continue to monitor the system closely and hope for an equally normal summer. Any questions?
I'll just get you to stop sharing your screen, Jen, so I can see folks raise their hands. Does anyone have any questions for Jen about that report? Good, good. Must have been a good report, Jen. Very thorough. Thank you so much. It's always good news when you hear that things are normal and the forecast is going to keep them that way. Moving on to item number 5 on the agenda, the offer to purchase KNP. It's report 3212 that's in your agenda. You also received an in-camera portion of that agenda as well. So just keep in mind that the information in that report, if we want to discuss that, we will need to go into closed session to do that. The motion that we will be considering ultimately is resolved that the board of directors decline the Bucci offer. Could I have a mover to put that on the table, please? Moved by John Carreau, seconded by Phil Sweetnam. Now my question is there any discussion on this matter? Because if there is, we're going to move into camera to do that. I'll note that the Glenn Bucci is present in the room at the meeting right now. So he's here to observe today. Does anyone have any questions or comments about this? In which case we'll move into the in-camera session.
I do have a question.
Okay, is it information about the report or is it just sort of a general discussion? Or does it touch on the in-camera portion?
I think it should be in camera. It's not in the report.
Okay. Okay, then that's where we go. Then what I'll do for that portion is resolve that the board of, I will move, resolve that the board of directors move to in-camera discussion to address the proposed or pending acquisition or disposition of land by the authority, and further resolve that staff remain in the room. Can I have a seconder for that? Faye Campbell. All in favor of moving into camera and keeping staff in the room? Okay, we'll be moving into camera. So if you're not staff, Glenn, we're going to put you in a waiting room while we have our in-camera discussion, and then we'll come back and we'll deal with the main motion. Sally, iteration of the motion. Okay, thanks everybody. We're back in open session. We had a discussion around the motion itself, with specific regards to some of the in-camera items. And now we'll go on to consideration of the motion, which is resolved that the board of directors decline the Bucci offer. All in favor of the resolution, please raise your hands. Any opposed? Motion is carried. John, were you opposed? I'm sorry. I just were you in favor? Saw your hand lingering.
I'm in favor of the motion.
Okay, thank you. Sorry, I didn't mean to call you out. It's just I'm a little slow on the draw today. Okay, so the motion is carried. Now on to item 6, which is a deferred item from our last meeting, which is the review of the committee structure. As the recommended motion is resolved that the board of directors direct staff to draft and table amendments to MVCA's administrative bylaw to address the recommendations contained in report 3204/22. Could I have somebody move that so we can put it on the floor, please? Moved by Andrew Tennant, seconded by Faye Campbell. Sally, I'll hand the floor over to you.
Okie doke. So as you're aware, at our last board meeting, this item came forward. It had already gone before the Planning Policy and Priorities Committee. And there was some, I'm just noticing a bit of a typo there, but in any event, there was concern that some of the direction and suggestions or comments made weren't reflected in the staff report that came forward to the board for consideration. And so the item was deferred so that the board members could have the opportunity to review the draft minutes, which were included in this package, to see the type of comments that had been received and the direction given that staff would be implementing in terms of bringing forward actual language for the amendments to the administrative bylaw. So the key comments that had been received or heard during the PNP meeting was about the use of legislative agenda terminology as part of the executive function. Not quite sure what this was here, but I'm going to delete it live. Staff was directed to make executive meetings as needed as opposed to quarterly. We also took direction that a PAC would be, a public advisory committee would be formed now for the Mississippi River watershed, but that a separate one would be created at some time in future for the CARP. And then lastly, that it was important to make sure that the terms of reference be very clear, that the Public Advisory Committee was an advisory committee only, and it had no decision-making power. So with those clarifications on the nature of the discussion that occurred at the PNP, if the board concurs with the overall direction and with these considerations, then I would propose that if the board approves the motion, staff will go back and actually draft language for the administrative bylaw.
Thanks, Sally. And that would be approved as per the recommendations coming out of the PNP committee?
Yes, so the draft language would go to the PNP first and then be elevated to the board for approval.
Thank you. John, go ahead. You're on mute, John.
Here we go. Sorry about that. I did circulate an observation to the board and staff with respect to table 2. And I do want to say at the outset that I think table 2 is certainly a really good improvement, particularly the difficulty that we've had in terms of which committee to take certain items to, and where do you want to make sure that you're also bringing, you know, the full board into the discussion. So that aspect I like, and I do apologize if this might be a little out of step, but I thought it was important enough to raise, and that is, when I've looked at table 2, I ended up with a question about the workload distribution between the Finance and Administration Committee and the Policy and Planning Committee. If in fact that is a concern, and it is a concern to me, one possible way to improve upon that would be to have the issue of personnel administration and the employee manual and health and safety manual policies taken to the Policy and Priorities Committee. And that keeps the full emphasis of finance and administration on what in fact is a very busy agenda on finances. So that's my observation and recommendation.
So are you moving to amend table 2 as presented?
I am.
Okay. Have you captured that amendment, Sally?
So just to clarify, under the first column, the third bullet, you're looking to remove "and personnel administration" and move that into column 2.
Correct.
You're looking to move 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, bullet 5 in its entirety over.
Correct.
Was there a third thing?
No.
Okay.
Good. So we'll take that as a moved amendment. John Inglis, I see your hand. Is this on the proposed amendment?
Well, I guess we're going to discuss the amendment. Maybe I should wait until we've actually accepted the amendment.
Okay, well, this is the time to discuss the amendment that John's proposed before we move to amend the table as presented. So if it's with respect to another matter, we'll wait until after we've dealt with the motion itself. So is there
Well,
any
then
discussion?
I would like to hear an argument against John Carrow's proposal. I'm sure there is some argument somewhere. Maybe Sally could comment.
So I guess I was just wondering, do you need a seconder to the amendment?
Yes, I do. Thank you. Seconded by Roxanne Darling.
So with that, I guess my experience over the past 3 years is that it's most of the heavy lifting this term of council has been by the Policy and Priorities Committee. Now, a lot of that was because the work we did on the watershed plan. I do anticipate it also being fairly heavy next term of council because of all the new regulatory requirements we have coming down the pipe. Now, some of those are financial in nature as well, but a good number of them are policy planning type things. Personnel administration, depending on the nature of it, can have financial implications, which is why it's there. I have no opinion whatsoever on whether the employee manual and health and safety manual could go either for me. I was just trying to sort of, under the admin side of things, having all those kind of administrative documents under that one committee.
Any other comments? No, seeing none, then I'll put, oh, Krista, go ahead.
Sorry, a little slow on the draw there, Mr. Chair. I appreciate where the amendment is coming from. I think, having chaired the Finance and Admin Committee now for a number of years, I think this year was a bit of an anomaly. I don't know that moving forward, it's going to be as challenging going through our budget process. Not to say that there's not other things that we do in that committee, of course there are, but I think this year it was particularly challenging to come up with that draft budget that we could table to the board. So maybe this is something that gets flagged to be reviewed, but I'm not sure if we need to move things out of finance and admin just now, especially if there is expected to be, more heavy lifting for policy and priorities moving forward. Just leave my comment there. Thanks, Mr. Chair.
Thanks, Krista. Paul, go ahead, please.
I guess my comment sort of echoes Krista's. I think when you look at this, policy and planning is sort of the conservation authority and what it does in its interactions with the community at large, where everything over that's on finance and administration is more internalized to how we manage the finances of the thing, how we have managed the staff, and all of those things that John's asking to move over are sort of integral with staff and the management internally. So I wouldn't support the change. And as Krista says, when I joined or when I came onto the board, they said, well, okay, policy and planning is the big one to go to, finance administration, not so much, usually a couple times a year. Well, it's been different the last little bit, but I think it's an anomaly and it'll start balancing out.
Thanks, Paul. Phil.
I'm inclined to support Chair Krista in saying that I think we can handle the load. I'm probably more stressed when I saw the agenda today at 158 pages, but it wasn't so bad when you got there, I guess I would say. I think we can handle the load, and I appreciate the what can I say, the good nature or the good way that John has brought this forward, but I think we can handle the workload, I guess is what I would say.
Thank you, Phil. Go ahead, Andrew.
Sorry, can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Great. I just had a quick question about, I'm not entirely sure what I think about it. I kind of waver on this one. How difficult is it to change this at a different time? Are we doing, we're doing a review right now, but is it difficult to make these types of changes later on? That's a question for Sally.
Well, anytime we change the administrative bylaw, it has to be approved by the board. So, I mean, however, if as we're creating a longer term role for the executive committee, it may be that if there was a concern on this, that the executive committee could consider the matter and potentially redirect. I mean, there's nothing stopping the board from amending its bylaws at future, right? So that's the bottom line.
That's perfect. Thanks very much.
Any other questions or comments on this? We'll go to a vote then. All in favor of the amendment as proposed? Raise your hands. 1, 2, 3. Oh, 2. All opposed? Raise your hands. The motion is defeated. Okay, so we're back to the main motion that the Board of Directors directs staff to draft and table amendments to MVCA's administrative bylaw to address the recommendations contained in report 3204/22. Is there any more discussion on this? Nope. All in favor of the motion, please raise your hands. The motion is carried. Next item on the agenda is the Lower Mississippi Floodplain Mapping Update Report. That's the big FUD in the middle of your agenda today.
Sorry, Mr. Chair, I was a little slow off the mark.
Oh.
I just wanted to thank people who intervened. I think the answer that I was looking for, I got. That people are not worried about having a workload imbalance, and that they're quite willing and capable to manage that. So I'm okay.
Thanks, John.
I just want to thank John for paying so much attention.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. And thanks for the heads up ahead of the meeting that you were considering this too. It's always nice to know when something's coming.
I'd just like to say we're thankful that somebody else was looking after us. But as soon as we sense stress, we're going to ask for one of those things that the staff got via circulate and see who has problems with the workload or something.
You just don't show up for meetings. So, okay, the next item that we're considered, I'll be looking for someone to move. Resolve that the Board of Directors adopt report 3217/22 and the associated GIS-based flood hazard limits and floodplain maps as the delineation of areas along the lower Mississippi River that is susceptible to flooding during the regional flood standard as defined in Schedule 1 of Ontario Regulation 153/06, and direct that the report, maps, and regulation limit be used in the implementation of Ontario Regulation 153/06. So we're moving to adopt the new flood boundaries as proposed. Are you moving the motion, John? Moved by John Inglis, seconded by Phil Sweetman. Okay, I'll turn the floor over to Yara to make a presentation on this, and then we'll go into discussion.
Hey, thank you, Mr. Chair. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, I can.
All right, so let me share my screen here real quickly. Can you see my screen?
Yes, I can.
We've got
All right, fantastic. Thank you. Okay. So a quick recap, basically MVCA updated floodplain map for lower Mississippi back in 2019. The maps were then adopted by board in April 2020. In 2021, landowner notified us of an area outside of the floodplain that is subject to flooding. So we looked at this in more detail and also identified more issues, which led us to develop a work plan to review and update the 2019 study. And this work plan was then presented to the board and approved in June 2021. So in this study, we basically updated floodplain maps for the main branch of the river from Bridge Street in Carlton Place all the way down to the confluence with Ottawa River. So this is a 55 plus kilometer long stretch of the river, which really represents a large floodplain mapping project. The contributing drainage area for lower Mississippi is over 850 square kilometers, and this is mostly agricultural land. The two provincially significant wetlands, one is the Morris Island wetland complex, and the second one is Appleton wetland, just north of the village of Appleton. And then we have 5 towns and 4 river major tributaries along the river. The tributaries were not subject to updating, only the main branch of the river. So this slide basically outlines the general approach that MVCA follows for floodplain mapping projects. So it's delineate, prepare, adopt, and share. We are now at the 3rd step. Basically, we have completed the study, and now we are presenting to the board obviously for adoption and then for application of Section 28 regulations. I also want to say that MVCA floodplain mapping projects are completed in accordance with the provincial technical guidelines. And then these are river and stream systems, flooding hazard limit, and the second guideline is the erosion hazard limit. In terms of, I don't want to go into too much detail about the technical aspects of the methodology, just like a quick summary. You know, a comprehensive technical review was of the 2019 study was completed by MVCA engineering staff, but also by an independent consultant. We retained JFSA, and all the comments from these 2 reviews were addressed and incorporated in the update, and you can find them in the appendices A and B in my report. The study used the latest LiDAR data that was collected by NRCan in 2019, so we updated the terrain in the model. Field surveys and reconnaissance was completed to fill in the existing data gaps that we identified. Hydrological analysis was updated with the latest flow data. 2-dimensional model was developed for river sections with complex hydraulics. Then, you know, it was a systematic comprehensive update of the hydraulic model. Again, details can be found in the report. I'm not going over them now. And then the model was validated against historical observations. And finally, our regulation mapping was updated with revised flood lines, erosion hazard lines, and wetlands. So in summary, we really used the latest data and technology available for the update. For example, land surveys were conducted at different historical flood-prone locations, which are highlighted here. I don't know if you can see my mouse in red on this figure. And we used real-time kinematic positioning system, or RTK, for this data collection. You can see the unit on this figure here. So it's basically a system that communicates with the base station, and the base station transmits correction to the unit in real time. So it really provides some very accurate measurements of elevations and positions. Then bathymetry survey was also completed as part of this update. The bathymetry, we collected channel elevations basically around these islands just downstream of Carlton Place. So this is MacArthur Island, Arkan Island, and Glen Isle. So it's all the green highlight is basically where we collected bathymetry data. And for bathymetry, we used ADCP, which you can see on this figure. So the ADCP unit was mounted on this buoyant rover. And basically, we're looking at a $200,000 equipment here, which we were fortunate to use for this project in collaboration with the University of Ottawa. And then we also held meetings and site visits with engineers at TransAlta, NM2, and all the hydropower companies in the lower Mississippi to basically confirm structure, dimensions, as-builds, operations during flood events and all that. And we updated all these structures and dams in the model. Then also a high resolution two-dimensional hydrodynamic model was built to capture this complex flow regime downstream of Carleton Place, where the river branches and creates many small and large islands, right? So this is basically where the one-dimensional model has limitations because it's just 1D, right? And the model cannot simulate the flow in different directions. So that's a major limitations of the 1D model that was previously used. This left figure here shows the model domain of the 2D model domain. The model included over 20,000 computational cells, which you can see better on the second image here. In the floodplain, the resolution of the model was 25 by 25 meters. So this cells is 25, and then a high resolution was used in the channel, which was 10 by 10. So and really, you know, the two-dimensional modeling is now, engineers are starting to use it in the province for floodplain mapping projects, and it's really superior to the 1D because it solves the full Saint Venant equation and accounts for both the continuity and momentum. So it's provides some additional detail that the traditional modeling is not capable of. And here's an animation showing the flood extent corresponding to the 100-year event, and also the model shows the preferential flow paths from the 2D model. I don't know if you were able to see. I can run it again real quickly. Okay, an important step of this project was model validation against known historical flood marks or observations that MECA staff did back in 2019. The 2019 flood event was basically the 100-year event. A few examples are here. So this one is from Carleton Place, 63 Waterside Drive. So the red line shows the observed flood mark, and we see that the model did a really good job predicting the flood extent. The second one is the Tranquil Acres Trailer Park, which again, this red line shows the field observations of the flood, and we see that and the existing model failed to predict flooding in this area. So the updated model did a much better job here and shows now this area is being flooded during the 100-year event. And then this last example is from Almont Metcalfe Park. So again, this was the extent of the flooding that was observed back in 2019, and we see that the model was basically dead on and did a really good job here predicting the flooding extent and then the flood elevation. So in terms of floodplain maps, we produced 15 map sheets for the main branch of the river at the scale of 1 to 5,000. The map sheets used our latest aerial photography. You can see an example here. I think this is sheet number 14. This is Glen Isle, and the red line is the flood line, and the yellow line is the regulation limit, which is based on the flooding hazard, unstable slope or erosion hazard, and also includes wetlands. Okay, so once we had the flood maps updated, the next step was that we compared it to the 2019 flood maps, just to see, you know, what are the changes in flood-prone areas, flood extents, flood elevations, and all that. The good news was that the revised flood line follows closely the 2019 line in most cases, and when it doesn't, these changes are mostly occurring in rural areas. So there's really minimal impacts to buildings and infrastructure. So starting, you know, in Carleton Place here and moving downstream, really we see that some of the significant changes compared to the 2019 flooding was observed along Waterside Drive. You can see here the flood line encroaches some of the backyards here, but does not impact the buildings. We have now one building in the floodplain. This is 107 Paddy Lane on the other side of the river here in this area. Now we have also two driveways on Paddy Lane that will be flooded, but will not lose safe access because of the minimal depths. Then the other change is observed in the Anthony Kuro Park here, which shows much more flooding now in the revised model. But again, no buildings are impacted. It's just public space. Then we see an increased flooding on Arkan Island, which is a large area that was previously not flooded. But again, it's just a green space, basically forested area in the floodplain. Then moving downstream to Glen Isle, so we have the Tranquil Acres trailer park that I previously discussed, which is now showing a large area being flooded, which corresponds to the field observations. The other change here is that now the updated model is basically showing us that during the regulatory flood event, the Glen Isle will have another island here. This is a high ground, high elevation area that will lose access, will not be connected with the rest of the island anymore. And this is not going to be a safe access. But again, it's a green space. So there are no buildings or no infrastructure here. And then we see two other areas that with increased flooding. One is the Lavely Creek just south of the island here. And the other one is just east of Glen Rapids in this area. But again, it's just like green space. Then moving down to Appleton, the only change here is we see the floodplain now encroaches this building, which is 521 River Road. And then floods the Appleton Bay Park much more than previously, and this includes the boat launch and the parking lot. And going down to Almond, this updated modeling confirmed flood-prone area along the Mill Street. You can see it here in a zoom window down here, which will be impacting Kirkland Park and the Riverwalk. And this area will remain on our maps designated as a potential spill area. And this was indeed an area that where sandbags were used back in 2019 during the flood in April 2019. Then the second area worth mentioning is the Bridge Street and Water Street down here, where you see the flood line basically impacting about 10 houses along the water road. And then we have an additional 2 houses at the southeast end of the Water Street. But this is no change from the 2019 event. We see that there's basically the flood line is identical with the 2019 flood line. And also, so during the 100-year event, the portions of the Water Street here and down here, and also Tooley Street and Jane Street will lose safe access. So that's another item that should be mentioned. Then going down to Blakeney, we see some expanded floodplain surrounding this pool downstream of the rapids. And also the new model was able to capture this bypass channel that exists there, right? So so now that's another change in the updated flood map. So this area will be isolated and will not have safe access during the flood event. Then another change, basically the Riverbank Park is another flood-prone area. So this is a trailer park. It's no change from the 2019 mapping, except maybe for one additional structure. So we have about 40 to 50 structures, mostly trailers, which will not have safe access. And then I think this is the final screen, is the Pakenham. So what we see here is again the floodplain was expanded just downstream of this first rapids here. And then behind, I think this is Margaret Street. So, but this is all green space and there are no buildings or infrastructure that would be affected. So that's basically, this is my last slide with the recommendations. And I guess the next steps, you know, after the board adopts a study, the updated maps and regulation limit will be posted on our website. And we will also provide this information to local municipalities for inclusion in their land use planning documents. So thank you for your attention, and please let me know if you have any questions.
Thank you very much, Euro. That was a very thorough report, as it should be. It's an important. This is bread and butter for the Conservation Authority, and I just the thoroughness of the review that was done using superior technology. I want to acknowledge the work that went into this with staff to get this done and to conduct such a thorough review of the floodplain mapping. Thank you very much, Euro, to you and all of your staff for putting this in front of us.
Thank you.
So now we'll go on to discussion. I have Janet and then Phil.
Yeah, question for Euro. Do we have any concerns about other floodplain mapping that had been done in the last few years, perhaps with lesser technology or lesser information about where we were doing the floodplain mapping?
That's a very good question. And I think just off the top of my head, I can think of Mississippi Lake, which was mapped, I think, in 2014. So, you know, all floodplain mapping should be revisited at least every 10 years and to look at what has changed in the watershed, you know, has the flows or levels changed, you know, so a cursory review should be done every 10 years to see if an update is warranted. And I know that, speaking of, for instance, the two-dimensional modeling, the Mississippi Lake would be a next project where the 2D modeling would establish more accurately the water elevations that would be used for the lake.
Thank you.
Go ahead, Phil.
Yes, again, I want to echo what the chair has said. This is really good work, and I gather that the superior technology, this 2D modeling, talked about 1D modeling. Is there what's the biggest difference between this 1D that was there and now 2D? Is it just the size of the squares?
No. The one-dimensional model doesn't have a cell. So basically, the one-dimensional model has cross-sections, and these are spaced every 200, 300 meters. And so the 1D model only gives information at the river cross-sections every 300 meters or 500 meters, whereas the two-dimensional model gives you an information about flow, velocity, elevation, everything at each computational cell, which are spaced every 10 meters or 25 meters. So like the resolution is exponentially bigger.
And could I ask, I think it was Water Street, it mentioned that probably appropriate place to have water on the street, but it was 3.9 meters, sorry, 0.39 meters above during the flood, covered by 0.39 meters, but only allowed 0.3 meters in order to still consider safe passage. Does WECI or anything like that help the municipality if they decided they wanted to bring the thing up 9 centimeters? Or is that just the responsibility of the people in front on the street, or how does that work in other places?
Vicky, I'm sure, you know, this wouldn't be eligible for some funding, but I think it's a responsibility of, you know, landowners and, you know, municipality.
All right. And the other one I just wanted to ask about in your report, you mentioned that people will pay the standard fees for access to this, even when you get it, you're going to put it up on the internet. Does that apply to just this project or to all projects which we previously had free access to? Will we now be paid access fees to see these online? it really looks, it's well organized and people can go to particular areas of the 19 areas you showed and stuff like that. I think it's, superb work and well documented and peer reviewed and all that stuff. So much appreciated, but just what is the access cost going to apply across all the maps?
The maps are basically published on our website and they are free for everyone to download and look at. There can be also access to the portal map, right? So anyone can access this information. The only thing that MVCA is charging fee for are the models itself, right? And this is in line with the policies at RVCA and South Nation, which also charge for basically the models. A lot of effort, and as you can imagine, goes into developing the tools, the models. So if a consultant requests, a copy of the model, then we are charging for it.
That seems fair. Just one concluding comment, an excellent report. In some other areas where I'm interested in housing and so on, they say, if your report gets over 30 pages, you should have a good executive summary, because unlikely the people you're trying to convince won't likely read the whole thing. I was really trying to read really fast towards the end to get to the last of this report. But anyway, a good executive summary. I think there's something there that gave us a rough idea, but something a little more complete would be wonderful. Anyway, just overall, well done, and thank you to you and JDS and so on. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, Bill, are there any more questions for Euro or any comments before we go to the motion? Seeing none, I'm not going to reread that motion, but I think everyone understands what we're doing. All in favor of the motion to adopt the report and provide direction to staff? Motion is carried. Thank you, Euro, very much for this again.
Thank you.
On item number 8, Management of Reserves, Report 3213 in your agenda. The motion that I have is resolved that the Board of Directors direct staff to 1, prepare and table draft policies governing the operating reserve and restricted reserve funds. 2, report to the board each fall on the state of the operating reserve and reserve funds concurrent to seeking budget and levy direction. 3, update the 5-year capital needs assessment and assess the health of reserve funds. And 4, update the 10-year capital plan, including a schedule of projected capital levies and reserve contributions. Could I have a mover for this, please? Moved by Krista Lowry, seconded by Glenn Gower. Sally, the floor is yours. Phil, I'll ask you to put your hand down, please.
Okay, so I'm recognizing that Finance and Committee members have already heard this. So I'll try to cover the same ground, but a bit more quickly. So this is where our reserves are today, both the operating and the various capital restricted reserve funds. And the reason why we're having this conversation is because of, concerns raised during the 2022 budgeting process about, in particular, what kind of target did we want to set for the operating reserve, and how do we want to manage our reserves going forward, because we don't have any particular policy on it. So we looked at historical levels in terms of what our operating expenses were, the blue, and then the green, what our net of our levy expenses were. So part of our operating expenses are paid by the levy, and this would be other sources of revenues. And then the orange is where you can see how our operating reserve balance has changed over time. And this dashed line is an average of $625,000 per year in our operating reserves. So you can see that it definitely dipped down when we bought this, built this building, and that obviously operating costs have gone up over time, but that net of operating expense, net of levy, so that amount of our operating expense that's not covered by the levy has fluctuated actually quite considerably. So the recommendation of our auditor back in the fall, and he reiterated it again earlier this year, was that he felt we needed to be setting aside a percentage of money based upon that non-levy revenue. So we took a deep dive in looking at those other sources of revenues to see, well, what is it made up of? So you can see in this table here where those other sources of revenues are. Now, special grants tend to fluctuate significantly, and they're usually very much tied to a project, and therefore you get the grant, you do the project. So I tend to, sort of cross those out in that they can be quite, a bit of a red herring. This big blue one that you see here in 2016 under other was actually the sale of the Glencairn property in Canada, and therefore it's a very unusual type of expenditure as well. So when you pull out, the brown and these other blues, which could be from a whole source of a variety of different things, then what you're looking at are, the major categories left over are planning revenues, our Section 39 revenues, and our parking revenues, with the planning revenues being the most significant, especially combined with the permits. Now, those two sources of revenues are obviously very much tied to land development and the state of the economy and the like. As such, the volume of work that comes in the door is very much tied to that the demand for those types of planning reviews and permits. As you know, with the swing in the building sector, the development sector in recent years, we've had to increase staffing. If we ever reached a state where there was a protracted downturn in the economy, the workload would contract, and we would necessarily have to probably reduce the workforce accordingly. And you'll remember when I tabled the workforce plan last year that I did identify volume-based positions that we would have to increase if volume warranted, and that what this is telling you here is that should those revenues decline, the workload likely wouldn't be there to support those staff at the same time. So the risk on the revenue side, to my mind, isn't that great. And if those revenues are compromised, there is a very straightforward management approach to mitigating the impacts to any sort of the operating reserve or other reserve. So of greater concern to me actually is on the expenditure side, those years where we have unplanned expenditures. And these are the different types of things that, we were looking at in terms of risk to the organizations where we have higher than planned expenditures. Now, a lot of these are mitigated through our insurance policies, and the report has that. I didn't include that in the presentation here, but we are very well insured for any number of risks. And the good news is that in recent years, we haven't had to dip into that at all. But, if we looked at it on whole amongst those various insurable expenditures or risks, the sum total of the deductibles was, I'm going to say it was somewhere in the $20,000 to $30,000 mark. If we looked at like 25%, like you're never going to have a year where all those deductibles are going to come into play. But let's say we took 25% of them, it's a very manageable amount that we could accommodate within the operating reserve. So what we did was we looked at, okay, of those, when you look at the deductibles, what else could we incur in terms of expenditures, unplanned expenditures that aren't insured? So One of the major ones would be a cash flow interruption. I mean, we depend very heavily on that regular cash flow that comes in through the municipal levies. And some of you pay them, maybe once or twice a year, but the City of Ottawa's comes in every month. And so if we incurred 2 or 3 months of the City of Ottawa for whatever reason, not coming through, then we would actually run into a cash flow problem. So maintaining enough money in the operating reserve to ensure that no matter what happened on that source of revenues, that we would have sufficient cash flow to carry us through is very important in my mind. Some of the other things that we incur are protracted vacancies, where if we had somebody who left and we couldn't fill the position, and I know that some of you in the municipal sphere have experienced that in recent years, where it's been extremely difficult to fill some vacancies and you end up having to contract out. Well, that's what we're allowing for here, is a half a year of having to contract out a service because you can't fill a vacancy. Another related one, though, is staff turnover. And then sometimes when you have staff turnover, you end up, because people have, unused toil or vacation, where they end up being on the books at the same time as you've brought in somebody else. So you're actually having to pay 2 sets of payroll for one position. So we make an allowance for that. Another area where we could have unexpected expenditures is in students. We like to plan to, that a certain amount is covered by grants, but we end up having to staff those positions often before we're notified. So last year, I think we weren't notified till mid to late May that positions that we had filled as of May 1st had actually received grants. And then allowing for other unplanned and some contingency. What we come up with is a sort of a goalposts of where we might want to land for an operating reserve of around 700,000. And I say goalpost because in all the research that we carried out of other jurisdictions, both here in Eastern Ontario and both municipal and conservation authorities, nobody had firm policy that said we shall achieve an operating reserve balance of X, whether X be a percentage of one or more, performance indicators. So they all had guidance in terms of policies, but nothing that would tie their council or their board's hand to adjust as needed to address whatever circumstances they might find themselves in. So that in itself was quite instructive. So in terms of next steps, I think given the research we've done and where what we've learned in terms of the different types of things that a policy should address, we would propose to come back and with some draft policy for the management of reserves and to report back to the board on the state of our reserves at the same time as we're bringing forward to you the draft parameters for the 2023 budget. And then as it relates to the capital side, we really need to update our needs assessment for the next 5 years, because the old version was very much based upon what we then knew and had planned for Shavamika and Kashwakamak. And as you know, things changed significantly in those with those 2 dams the past year. So we need to update the needs assessment and then come back with an updated capital plan. The key thing being with how the affordability analysis, what sort of contributions to reserves would we need to be making to afford that capital program, and set some objectives around that. So I will stop sharing. Happy to answer any questions.
Thanks for that, Sally. And just, I didn't mention that the motion that we're dealing with is a direct recommendation from the FNA committee, and comes out of that committee. And the minutes for the committee are in item 3C on the agenda, if you want to reference the discussion that happened at that committee. Does anyone have any questions or comments for Sally about the report? John, go ahead, John Inglis.
There we go. Sally, I'm not clear of the difference between the 5-year capital plan and the 10-year capital plan. Can you explain that?
Absolutely. So the 5-year is actually a needs assessment. So we make the distinction between a needs assessment and a capital plan, because the needs, you can't always address all your needs. And that's the difference between your needs assessment, what we think we need to do, and your capital plan and your program, what we can afford to do. And it's really important that the board have that information so it can make an informed decision about the 10-year capital program. So we're saying, let's update the needs assessment for the next 5 years, make darn sure we're comfortable on what staff recommends needs to be done. And that would have some sort of priority setting. And then the 10-year capital plan is more a financial document that reflects the affordability of the organization.
So in other words, the 5-year needs assessment doesn't have to be financially realistic.
That's correct. It's what staff is identifying are the needs of the organization. And then
Thank you.
Thanks, John and Sally. Phil, go ahead, please.
Yeah, yes, I just wanted to say that in my tenure here, I don't think Ottawa has ever not paid its bill on time. It used to be quarterly or something like that, but I think you're right. The decision to go receive the money, or for them to send the money monthly is indeed a good one. Have you heard across the province, are there many cases where municipalities are refusing to pay their municipal levies? Like I think one small municipality once was angry with us about something and wouldn't pay its $1,500 share or something like that. But I don't recall municipalities generally contesting paying the levy. Anyway, I guess in summary, it's good to take a very conservative view and hold back sufficient money, but I just don't want people to get gray hairs over, is it likely that Ottawa will not pay its levy in the future? And has that occurred elsewhere in Ontario? Thank you.
So there have been instances of other jurisdictions withholding payment for one reason or other. No, I have no expectation of the City of Ottawa defaulting, but I felt it was a more easily understood concept than this net of levy concept being forwarded by our auditor, particularly when we did the deep dive on our other non-revenue sources of our non-levy sources of revenue.
Thank you.
Thanks, Sally. Are there any other questions about the motion that we have on the floor? Questions or comments? Okay, all in favor of the motion as presented, please raise your hands. Motion is carried. Now we're on to our information items, and the consent agenda has already been dealt with. So we'll go into item number 9, managing stress in the workplace as a report. Just you received a copy of the report again in camera. We'll go into camera if there's any discussion or questions about the actual report itself. But just to let you know that we're presenting, this is being presented to you today as an information item because it was very important to staff that they wanted the board to receive this report and understand the discussion that was going on and the issues that are being managed by senior managers at the MBCA, which is why it's been presented now with the timeline for addressing it, which managers have been addressing. Just say I was privy to the report later last year, and the executive committee did review it in November, and we're comfortable with the process of bringing it to the board at a time when the question of, well, what are you doing about this could be addressed. And I think we're at that point in time, which is now why it's being presented to you today, but today for information so that you're aware of what's going on and what's going to be coming to the Finance and Admin Committee in terms of recommendations going forward. So that's why it's here today. And we have a report in front of us, and I think we might as well just go into camera to discuss, because I imagine people have questions about the report itself. So resolved that the Board of Directors move into camera discussion to address personnel matters about an identified individual and individual employees of the authority, and that Sally McIntyre remain in the room. John, you're moving that? Moved by John Currow, seconded by Andrew Tennant. All in favor? Motion is carried. We're moving into camera. I'll wait for Zoom to tell me that the recording is stopped. The button. Okay, thanks, folks. We're back in open session regarding a helpful discussion of that issue. Thank you, Sally, for the thorough presentation that we received, and the comments were welcome from everybody. Thank you. Next item on the agenda, we have a staff presentation followed by a general manager update. And then we'll move into our source protection meeting after that. So item number 10, we have a presentation from the planning department. I'll turn that over to the staff. Once we have everyone back in.
Diane is showing as joining, but for some reason is having difficulty. And I don't see Erica. So let me just going to try to get her in again.
Hi, Ange, I see your hand up.
Matt's just checking on Diane and Erica.
Okay.
Just reconnecting. She got booted off, so she'll be right there.
Great.
Perhaps.
Can you confirm if Laura has been let back in or if she needs to reconnect, because she was setting up to be for the source protection meeting following?
I
can't see.
I can see her.
Yep, I'm here. Thanks, Laura. Thank you.
Perhaps if there's any, while we're waiting for the other two, if there's any questions regarding the GM update, I'd be happy to answer any questions that people have, if that's acceptable to the chair.
It is. It is. John Inglis, go ahead.
What are you going to do about Chris leaving?
Well, the job is posted. So yes. Yeah, tremendous loss, of course.
Yeah.
A tremendous opportunity for him. So right now, if you can share on social media, for those of you who are on social media, we're posting to replace Chris to fill an EIT position. And then I didn't mention in this one, it was going to get mentioned in my next one, Ross Ferguson has given us the retirement date. He's going to be retiring the end of May.
No.
Yes, yes, another retiree. See, this is what happens when an organization has so many senior, long-standing people. So we've been busily documenting everything we can to extract out of Ross that which we can.
Good. Faye, I see your hand. You're on mute, Faye.
Did my hand go up?
Yeah, it's up.
Okay. If I put my hand up, apparently it'll go up automatically. So my hand was raised before a little too high. Anyhow, number 4, would the Drinking Water Committee not be much the same as the water source that we're going to have after report? Would that not be the same as that committee?
So this is an initiative of Mayor Black for the various municipalities to collaborate around specifically water intake to the Carleton Place. And yes, the Source Protection Committee has that authority to look at that. I would I would suggest, because there's no fixed terms of reference, that if you have any specific thoughts around that, that perhaps Beckwith follow up with the mayor, because I'm not really in a position to speak in detail about what he has proposed.
Oh, this is the first I've seen it when I read it in the agenda today too. So I will check that out.
Okay. I'm just.
Yeah.
Is that John Carew and then Paul?
Thanks, Chair. Sally, one thing that sometimes works fairly well, and that is with those departing employees of actually seeing if they would be prepared to do a little mentoring, even after they're retired or moved on to another position. That kind of bridging, I think, can be quite effective. And it's also a form of recognition for the contribution they made.
Yeah, in fact, we are doing that with Ross. We can't let him go that easily. So that's already being negotiated there, John.
Good.
You wouldn't be able to find anything in the shed if you didn't do that. Okay, Paul, go ahead.
Sally, I'm another counselor who's on Drummond North Elmsley. I haven't heard anything about this water thing from Mayor Black. Did he talk about you in passing? But we haven't. And Faye's indicating she hasn't seen anything. That seems pretty odd that if he's doing something that we wouldn't have been advised.
I can't find that email off the top, but I know it went out not just to me, but it may have gone to your CAOs, and maybe your CAOs just haven't elevated it to councils yet. So maybe I'm a bit quick out of the gate here, and my apologies if that's the case, but I know that I was one of several on the invitees. So it may have gone to your mayors, Reeves, or CAOs. So it's probably just a timing thing that I've got it in front of you faster than your own CAOs were able to.
Okay, well, maybe he needs to be enlightened as to what the Source Protection Committee at the Mississippi does, because it looks like a duplication of effort, and it certainly, I can't see any real purpose in it.
Thanks, Paul. Krista, and then Ange, I see your hand up, but Krista, go first.
Thanks, Mr. Chair, and not to tear apart something that's in an info list here. I'm wondering if this drinking water committee, does this have to do with like inspections along the lake? Is that what he's talking about? Because that's the only thing I've heard any kind of talk about or whispers about. And I don't know that we've been approached either, but there has been some discussion about like septic inspections and whether we're looking to have that be done in some kind of more regular fashion. Is this what Mayor Black's talking about, or do we know?
So I know that was one of the issues was that he identified, because that's not a regulated matter. I think where his concerns were, sorry, it's sort of coming back to me now, is in those matters that aren't necessarily addressed under the Safe Drinking Water Act through the Source Protection Committee. So for example, the algae risk, which there is a plan in place, but maybe not on the mitigating side of things. So for instance, Carlton Place, I actually asked Guy at Carlton Place what your algae plan is, and it's a more reactive as opposed to a monitoring assessment mitigation plan. So I think that's where the mayor's concern is, that there are areas under the Safe Drinking Water Act that aren't covered. And he's looking to fill that gap. I think that's the key.
Okay, thank you. We haven't really heard about it over here either, so I'm also curious.
If I find that email, I'll flip it to all of you so that you can see, because I'm positive somebody in your organizations, because I wouldn't have shared it otherwise, we're on those lists.
Thanks, Ellie.
I think we're in the position of being the first meeting that's happened since the request went out. Okay, are there any more other comments on the general manager's update? I think, do we have, Ange, your hand was up. You're letting us know the status of the next item.
It's all ready. Yeah.
It's all ready to
Diane
go?
and Erica are on now, so.
Perfect. So we'll move on to the staff presentation from the planning department.
Hi, excellent. Thank you. Can everyone see this presentation we have shared?
Yes, we can hear you very well.
Wonderful. So my name is Erica Ogden. I am one of the environmental planners here at MVCA, and I have with me Diane Reed, who's showing up as Matt Craig at the moment, but Diane to introduce herself.
Hi there. Hi, it's Diane Reed. Just some technical difficulties here, but I think we have them worked out.
Great. So today we're going to speak a little bit about the planning and regulations, or mostly planning side of the advisory role that MVCA plays with our municipalities. And so when it comes to planning applications, MVCA's role really focuses on a watershed scale of management as well as that sub-watershed level. So we're looking at any applications that under the Planning Act require circulation to the Conservation Authority. And there's a list of them there on the screen for you. But our focus is really on matters of provincial interest as they relate to natural hazards. So that could be things related to flooding or erosion and things of that nature. But in addition to our role that we provide from the provincial interest, the Conservation Authority also has memorandums of understandings, or MOUs, that are signed with both the City of Ottawa and the County of Lanark, where we provide a few additional advisory services on behalf of the municipalities. And this is due to the in-house expertise that we have. So it relates to some of the stormwater management and knowledge we have in-house, as well as some of the natural heritage features that our staff are very familiar with from working at a watershed scale. So some of the examples of things that our staff review with a planning application related to our advisory role relate to fish habitat or areas of natural and scientific interest, issues related to water quality and quantity, and overall drainage and the management of stormwater. Whereas those items that are under our provincially delegated authority relate, as I mentioned, specifically to those natural hazards elements, to provincially significant wetlands and the adjacent lands immediately around wetland features, as well as other wetlands, those that have been identified but don't meet the criteria for provincial significance. So in our response to applications on planning matters, we look at both the advisory components and these regulatory roles as it relates to that, as I said, provincial delegated role. So Diane will discuss some of the applications we've been looking at for 2021.
So the next slide just provides us with a breakdown of all of the volume of planning applications. And again, we don't have the permitting volumes here. This is strictly related to plan review. So it's broken out by municipality as well as the type of application. And this is just for 2021. So we've got severances, zoning bylaw, minor variances, site plan, development approval applications, which take place in Carleton Place, official plan amendments, and subdivision and condo reviews. The total is 543, as you can see, for this past year. The next slide. And the next slide really just shows, it's a visual display of how these applications are distributed across the watershed. This particular visual does include both permits and planning applications. You can see a concentration along the Ottawa River shoreline, Canada North area, as well as Mississippi Lake. A lot of those dots are particularly along the Ottawa River, as well as Mississippi Lake, are due to rebuilding as a result of the flooding damage that we had in recent years. And the next slide, this is just to compare the last 3 years, so 2019 to 2021. Again, this is just planning applications, and it shows how the volumes have varied across those 3 years by municipality. As you can see, the trend is a general increase in volume, but most notably here is a significant increase in 2021, which is that green bar.
So as I sort of mentioned at the beginning, a lot of our role when it comes to planning applications is also helping to assist the municipalities through our partnerships on implementing those overall policies the province outlines in the provincial policy statement. So it's looking at sort of bringing together the sustainable development occurring in the area, while also looking at having that conservation taken into consideration. So we really provide to the municipalities a consistent approach across our watershed when it relates to development in environmental areas of concern. So there's been a lot more recently where we've seen more projects related to green infrastructure, implementing things like low impact development techniques, and really serving as kind of a one agency window, which really helps with some of the efficiency in the reviews we do by many of these overlapping services being offered in partnership with the municipalities.
The next slide is just about some of the challenges we face, and we have, many of you will have seen these before in previous presentations. They continue. There's a development pressure on the marginal lands now because the prime lands are already developed. I don't think that's real news to anyone, but it does leave those constrained lands, and it results in a much more complex review that involves review by our engineering staff, by our biologists, as well as the planners, with multiple technical reports involved many times. And just requires a review also many times, both from a planning perspective as well as the perspective of our regulatory role. So some of the letters get fairly lengthy, and but we try to keep it as intuitive as we can. There is a resistance, and that continues, to minimum standards. We see, again, that's because a lot of these lots are constrained and their inability, they can't meet the size requirements and the minimum setback standards, our focus being on water body setback. Yet we're also seeing at the same time this increased demand to convert small cottage lots into these full-time residences on these lots that were never intended to be used as such. So it presents a real challenge. We do work hard with the landowners to arrive at that compromise that everyone is happy with, but that's not always possible. A landowner recently said to me, I suspect we'll both go away a little unhappy at the end of this. And that's an unfortunate reality many times, not always, but many times. We stress the importance of pre-consultation in these cases, so the applicant doesn't spend money on plans that may ultimately not get approved. So that's really key. Still working with municipalities to better communicate the type of information we need. Continuing to try and work at being more clear in our review letters of our varying roles, advisory versus regulatory. And as we've mentioned, we've got a record volume of inquiries, permits, planning applications, and violations. We've never seen the volumes this high. We're happy to have new staff in the planning and regulations department that that's great to see. We do have to expect and experience a transition time with lots of training and experience needed before that staff can become independent and alleviate some of that workload. So we just continue to work with the new staff to get to that stage. And the next slide. The things to note in 2021, again, record volumes, which we mentioned. We continue to work on use our tracking and reporting system. So that really is in full force now, including the logging of all inquiries that we receive by both phone as well as email. Those all get logged. We did a few official plan reviews last year. We also updated our regulations policy last year as well, which was a big undertaking. Waterways are generally in good health, as I'm sure you're all aware. We monitor the health of 5 lakes every summer, and those reports are made available with the results. Erica mentioned LIDs. We are finding gradual acceptance to that. There is still some resistance, but gradually more accepted and becoming more of a standard part of the various plans. We've had a huge staff turnover, lots of new young faces here, which is nice to see. And the last point is just we're seeing some urban expansion in Mississippi Mills. And that's basically it for us. Are there any questions?
Thank you. I'll just have you stop sharing your screen so that we can see everyone in the room. And thanks. It's always nice to meet, especially places where there's been high staff turnover. It's good to see the staff at meetings, and it's lovely to hear from you from time to time. So thank you. I've got Glenn Gower and then John Corot.
Thanks, Chair. Thanks for the presentation. Our planning committee has had a lot of discussion lately on approval times for various applications. How do you track the efficiency of your review and approval process? And can you give our committee a bit of an idea of the length of time it takes to do some of the different levels of review and advisory services that you do?
I can start off talking about the City of Ottawa perspective, which is the area that I work in, and Diane can provide a little bit more about the other municipalities. But with the city, we work quite closely with their planning staff to the deadlines established. So when we are provided any information to review, city staff are always providing us with a deadline, expecting a response. And so I would say many cases, we are always meeting those deadlines. There are exceptions, but we do work, as I said, closely with staff to communicate when our reviews will take longer than expected. We have an internal tracking system where we are noting when we are sending our comments in to city staff in comparison to when the requested deadline is. So that gives us a little bit of an opportunity to keep track of that sort of information. In terms of the general timelines, with any applications, that's a resubmission. So it's not our first time looking at it. We are responding to those within 2 weeks generally. Depends on the complexity of the application. For the very first submission, if it's an application with a fair bit of technical review that is going to some of our other staff in the office, we tend to see more of an average of 4 weeks. Again, very dependent on the scope of what is within the application.
Okay, thanks for that overview. Appreciate it. Thanks, Chair.
Thanks, Glenn. Go ahead, John.
Thanks, Chair, and thanks for the presentation. I think this is one of the better ways to continue to know who are the staff and what are they doing. Slightly different question on my part, and that is, what, if any, impact have you noticed that the watershed plan has had in terms of helping people better understand the roles and responsibilities of MVCA?
Yeah, to be honest, I haven't had any feedback in that respect, so I can't really speak too much to that. I know it's certainly a very beneficial document But personally, I haven't had feedback on it from the public.
Hi, John.
Hello, Matt.
Just a couple examples. We've had some inquiries from the municipalities in regard to provincial initiatives around certain uses on public land. So throughout the watershed plan process, we did get feedback from the public, and so we passed on those. I didn't realize I was on camera. We passed on those summaries to the municipalities when they were being requested information from the province. So we're starting to see some of that information be implemented on for some special projects and inquiries, and people are aware of the plan. So it's starting to come in fruition. So it's coming there.
Thank you. You should probably go for a more neutral mast color.
I would have a Sens one on if I could, but I guess, this is the color of the Leafs. Anyways.
Sally, go ahead.
I just wanted to add, I think the document has been instrumental to one of our other planners, Alison Simon, who generally has the responsibility of commenting on major, official plan updates and that sort of thing, because it provides her with the information to support her feedback to the various planning departments when they're conducting those reviews. So I don't know whether they're on the receiving side, your municipalities are necessarily seeing it, but I think for us on the commenting side, we're finding it a very useful document because it helps to both inform and direct our comments.
Thanks, Sally.
Any other questions or comments? Seeing that, no, thank you, Diane and Erica, for the presentation, and Matt, as always. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank
Okay,
you.
We've reviewed the general manager's update. The next motion that I have is a motion to adjourn, and then we'll move quickly over into our source protection meeting. Could I have a motion to adjourn the board meeting, please? Moved by Roxanne, seconded by Paul Kehoe. All in favor of adjournment at 3:03. We are adjourned. Okay, folks, we'll move over into source protection meeting. Sally, I see a quorum as far as the roll call goes. I believe we're about, I think we have 11, we need 9. So if you're going to duck out, just please let me know so I can decide whether or not we have quorum or not. Okay, you received the Source Protection Authority meeting in your agenda. Could I have a motion to adopt the agenda for the April 20th Source Protection Authority meeting? Moved by Faye Campbell, seconded by Andrew Tennant. All in favor? Agenda is adopted. We also have the minutes from the last meeting. Resolved that the minutes of the Mississippi Valley Source Protection Authority meeting held on October the 20th, 2021 be received and approved as printed. Could I have a mover for that, please? Moved by, I will pick Janet Mason, seconded by Paul Kehoe. All in favor of adopting the minutes? The minutes are adopted. Next, we have our annual report, and that is going to be presented by Laura Cummings. Laura, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Let me know if you have any trouble hearing me. Today, I will be discussing the annual progress report that is due to the province by May 1st, 2022. It's required under Section 46 of the Clean Water Act. This report was brought to the Mississippi Rideau Source Protection Committee on April 7th for their consideration, review, and comments. There are 2 documents that are required for submission, and both were included in today's agenda. The first is the public-facing document that will be posted on our website and shared with our municipal partners. It also includes introductory information about the region, the Source Protection Committee comments, and overall grading. The second is the supplemental form. This will only be submitted and shared with the province, but has been included in today's agenda for information purposes. In summary, we are required to provide an overall grading for the region in achieving source protection plan objectives. Where the form asks for grading, 3 options are given to the Source Protection Committee. The first is progressing well and on target. The second is satisfactory, and the third is limited progress. There are 4 main sections to the public-facing document, with the 4th section further being broken down into 10 subsections that pull information from the supplemental reporting form. After presenting all sections of the document and reaching a consensus on the subsections that required grading, the committee decided that overall progress for 2021 was progressing well and on target. Any feedback received at the April 7th meeting has been incorporated into the report, and we are now seeking direction from our source protection authorities for the Mississippi Rideau Source Protection Region to submit the annual progress report to the province. Are there any questions?
Thank you, Laura. Does anyone have any questions for Laura regarding the report? Seeing none, it has a 5 grade. We're just being asked to give permission to submit it to submit the reports to the province. John Carreau, go ahead. You're on mute.
Thanks, Chair. Laura, more of a question beyond the public document itself. If you could just give us some sense as to what are the priority issues that continue to come to the Source Water Protection Committee.
Yeah, so in terms of, I guess I can just expand on the annual report first, and then you can let me know if there's anything else that you would hear. So basically, the main bulk of the annual report is to focus on how we are progressing with implementing our source protection plan policies. So right now we have about 90% of our significant drinking water threat policies implemented. There's about 10% left, and we've been working with the province to like basically we've given them a work plan to get everything else done, that last 10%. In terms of other, like, do you want to know like the work plan items?
No, I'm thinking of issues. I mean, if it's in the compliance area, 90% sounds like a very good report card. But are there particular topics? I mean, one of the things that I guess we discovered through the watershed planning process, that people have larger expectations for source water protection than we're able to deliver through provincially funded mandated programs. Do those types of concerns continue to come back to the Source Water Protection Committee?
Yeah, so we actually, I'm not sure if you're aware, but the province actually just released the best practices for source water protection. So that is basically along the lines of sort of a way to catch all the concerns that aren't covered under the Clean Water Act. And that also might be something else that, yeah, I heard you guys mentioning the Drinking Water Committee that Carleton Place has proposed. So that might be something that works into that document. But most of the concerns that we're seeing now are things that aren't, I guess you would say, covered under the Clean Water Act. So private drinking water, wells, whether it's wells or surface water intakes. So we have the best practices document. We can work with our municipalities and they can decide whether they want to have any uptake with that. Unfortunately, there's no funding. That there was funding provided a few years ago, but that has run out now.
Thank you for that.
Thank you, John. Does anyone else have any questions, comments about the report? No, seeing none, we'll move on to the main motion. That's resolved that the Mississippi Valley Source Protection Authority received the 2021 Source Protection Annual Progress Report, Public Facing Report, and Supplemental Form, including the Source Protection Committee comments and grading, and further resolved that the Mississippi Valley Source Protection Authority directs staff to submit the Annual Progress Report, Public and Supplemental Form, to the Ministry of the Environment, Conservation and Parks as required by the Clean Water Act and regulations. Could I have a mover for that, please? Moved by John Carreau, seconded by Glenn Gower. All in favor of the motion, please raise your hands. The motion is carried. Is there any other business for our agenda? No, seeing none, I guess then the next thing is the motion to adjourn. Resolved that the Source Protection Authority meeting be adjourned at 3:11 p.m. Could I have a mover for that? It's Roxanne, seconded by Faye. All in favor of adjournment? Thank you very much, folks. We are adjourned at 11 minutes after I was hoping to adjourn the meeting. Thanks for your attendance. It was I think it was a good meeting with a lot of discussion, and we will see you in a month's time.
Have a great afternoon, everyone.
Bye, everyone.